Good morning. This is Joe Firestone for Empowering Democracy, and this is my first update for today. It's called Generational, not Ideological Change. I'm going to share the screen. To present an article from the American Prospect, which is on the leadership transition in the House. It's entitled The Democrats' Generational Change. 80-year-olds are retiring with one notable exception. This is by Robert Kuttner, the previous editor of the American Prospect for many years. I believe he was the founding editor of the American Prospect, and he still writes a lot for the American Prospect. The article was written on November 21st, 2022. There's a picture of Jim Clyburn, Nancy Pelosi in the center. Jim Clyburn is the whip. And when Democrats are in the majority, we have the minority leader, Steny Hoyer. And in the middle, the speaker when the Democrats are in the majority, but Nancy Pelosi. House Democratic leaders, prodded by a narrow election loss, are turning the top offices over to the youngest leadership team in many decades. In a carefully choreographed transition set for November 30th, with no contested elections, Hakeem Jeffries, of New York, age 52, will become Democratic leader. Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, aged 59, becomes the whip. And Pete Aguilar of California, 43, becomes the caucus chair. Those are the three actual top spots in the party. Until now, Catherine Clark has been the assistant speaker, but that is a grooming position, which she was given by Nancy Pelosi. It does not hold much power itself. The article goes on. They will succeed Speaker Nancy Pelosi, 82, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, 83, and Whip Jim Clyburn, 82. It is the most extreme such generational transition ever. The average age gap is more than 30 years. Jeffries will become the youngest Democratic leader in the House since Charles Frederick Crisp of Georgia was elected to the post in 1891 at age 46. Jeffries could remain the minority leader or speaker for at least 20 years, says Kuttner. The octogenarian, still very much in office, of course, is Joe Biden, who turned 80 on Sunday, and the case for his retirement has just grown both weaker and stronger. It is weaker than it was before November 8th because Biden, despite his underwater approval ratings, managed to work miracles with a minuscule majority in Congress. and he beat the widely predicted midterm the blowout. Given all the challenges he faced, his improbable successes, and the immense stakes, historians could well remember Biden as a great or near great president. Now, I have a real problem with that particular statement because it seems to me that Biden has failed in a lot, that he's been a relatively weak leader of the Democratic Party. He, with the assistance of Nancy Pelosi, might have gotten some things through. But the thing to keep in mind is that what he got through was nowhere near what was needed given the challenges we as a nation collectively face. This is not a situation where the bottle is either half empty or half full. He completed his 2 years of the presidency. There was some good bills. The American Rescue Plan was a good bill in many respects, but the $15 an hour provision did not make it through, largely due to the weak leadership of Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, and to the failure of Bernie Sanders to put his foot down and say, I am not voting for this. Without the $15 an hour minimum wage rise in this bill. He also could have put down and said, I am not voting for this unless the child tax credit is permanent. This temporary stuff makes no sense. We won't get a chance to make it permanent. So in my view, the leadership was weak. And the leadership of the left was weak. And the leadership of the center of the Democratic Party was weak. They caved when they should not have caved. They needed to establish their dominance immediately with respect to Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, but they would not force the vote on the floor of the Senate for the full bill that came over from the House. And they would not modify that bill to make the child tax credit a permanent bill. So I don't think the leadership was strong there. I think the negotiations with Manchin and Sinema over a period of months were comedic in character. It seems to me that Manchin made a fool of them. He made a bloody fool of them. Biden's position that he respected the parliamentarian, that was ridiculous. I'll talk about that more a little later this morning, in another episode. But the failure to just ignore the parliamentarian or to fire the parliamentarian in order to get the $15 an hour provision into that bill, or to keep it in that bill, was a great failure of leadership. Franklin Delano Roosevelt would never have sat still for that. Never. He would have put that bill in front of them and he would have said, vote against it if you dare. Probably publicly. Biden as a great or near great president. He didn't do anything for the climate until that negligible amount of money that was appropriated in the Inflation Reduction Act. Completely inadequate. Completely inadequate. We need $4 trillion a year spent on the climate. That bill was 1/10 of that. Great or near great president, my butt. But that same election produced some possible candidates who could be far more dynamic and galvanizing in 2024 than Biden at age 82. The most interesting of these is Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Now, I like Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer compared to the other bozos who are around, but she is a centrist. She is a centrist. She will not be a future leader who will implement the changes we need. If anyone is that leader, it's more likely to be John Fetterman. She won a double digit on the re-election victory and took with her the first Michigan Democratic House, Senate, Governor trifecta in 40 years. Whitmer would bring substantial executive experience, and she would likely do well in other Midwestern swing states. Is he proposing Whitmer for president in 2024? Biden is more likely to be remembered well if he steps aside after one successful term rather than risking repudiation at the polls. Though Biden for now insists he's running in 2024, sometime next spring before the election cycle begins in earnest, he will need to do some hard thinking and take soundings. He will consult his own inner circle, his wife, and key legislative leaders whom he has known for decades. If they are honest, most will advise Biden that he has been a great president and that it's time for the next generation. Of course, I don't consider that honest. I consider a statement like that to be silly. Of course, you might have to say things like that to get Biden to retire, but that's another matter. Let's not say if they are honest. But Biden will make up his own mind, and if he runs, his party will have no choice but to unite behind him. Well, that's a fatalist attitude. Why will they have no choice but to unite behind him? His decision will be fateful. For the Democrats to take back the House and hold the Senate, the 2024 nominee needs to win big and have coattails. That I agree with. In 2020, Biden had none. However, if, as you say, he's such a great president, then why wouldn't this be recognized by the public, and why wouldn't he have substantial coattails in 2024? This reasoning is inconsistent, Robert. In the meantime, the new House leadership, despite the nominal unity slate, has work to do. The progressives are not enamored of Hakeem Jeffries. The progressives do not like Hakeem Jeffries because he's a corporate Democrat. Despite his membership in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, at times he has seemed more of a corporate Democrat than one of them, having created a pact with Josh Gottheimer. That pact is devoted to defeating progressive candidates for Congress, progressive candidates for the House. That's what that pact is for. Hakeem Jeffries is public enemy number one for progressives. It's not that they're not enamored of Hakeem Jeffries. They may not be enamored of Debbie Dingell or Rosa DeLauro or Jan Schakowsky, or Jimmy McGovern. But Hakeem Jeffries, the The progressives in the House can't stand his bloody guts. There is a lot of bad feeling in the caucus about the way this was managed by Pelosi and Hoyer. While other members considering running for leadership posts were told to step aside. Pelosi even sent out a message congratulating the three designees long before their formal election next week. Well, if they don't like the way this was managed by Pelosi and Hoyer, why don't they vote against the choices of Pelosi and Hoyer for leadership spots? Why are they just going to go along, march along, and vote for Hakeem Jeffries and Catherine Clark and Aguilar? By the way, Joe Neguse hasn't stepped aside. He's running against Aguilar. And they should elect Joe Neguse. He does represent the progressives in the caucus. He's a good representative. He may not be as good as Rashida Tlaib, but he's good. The DCCC, whose chair is yet to be determined, also cries out for reform. All too fittingly, the current chair, Sean Maloney of New York, lost his own seat. And he was responsible for the loss of a number of other seats in New York. Probably enough seats to have given the Democrats continued control of Congress if someone else had been the DCCC chair. Progressives want the DCCC chair to be elected by the caucus, not appointed by the leadership. That's what they do want. So why don't they begin a movement to back someone who'd be elected by the caucus, not appointed by the leadership? Let's say Debbie Dingell. Electing Debbie Dingell would give some pause to Nancy Pelosi, because Debbie Dingell and she have been allied. If the progressives get in back of her for leadership, Nancy Pelosi would have a tough time saying no. If Dingell went to Nancy Pelosi and asked her for her endorsement, after all, there's nothing preventing Pelosi from endorsing Jeffries and then endorsing Debbie Dingell as well. I think that would make things a little hard for Nancy Pelosi to make that particular decision. Progressives want the DCCC chair to be elected by the caucus, not appointed by the leadership. That's absolutely true. That process has yet to be determined, but that small reform would be a smart Jeffries gesture to his critics. Kuttner is already suggesting they give up and go ahead and elect Hakeem Jeffries. Screw that. The progressives need to band together, and they have to fight for someone more friendly to them to be the choice for leader of the Democratic Party in the House. Yeah, Debbie Dingell would be great for that spot. But also Barbara Lee would be perfectly well acceptable. Jan Schakowsky would be acceptable. Rosa DeLauro even would be acceptable. The woman behind the child tax credit, she would be acceptable to the progressives. The woman who led the opposition to the TPP, Rosa DeLauro, she would be acceptable. And she's very close to Nancy Pelosi. What justification would Nancy Pelosi have for failing to offer an endorsement to Rosa DeLauro. The DCCC in this cycle failed to support insurgent Democrats and disproportionately spent on incumbents. Worse, it used the same tired formulas of spending heavily on consultants and TV ads and far too little on grassroots voter mobilization. To win in 2024, the Democrats' change needs to be more than generational. Yes, does. To put a fine point on that, there needs to be more than generational change. That's identity politics again. That's all this is, identity politics. What's needed is ideological change. We need to have the election of leaders who are squarely behind the Green New Deal, leaders squarely behind a Medicare for All bill, leaders squarely behind student debt cancellation, leaders squarely behind the idea that every election going forward has to be a climate election because that's the existential threat. We need that, and we need the progressives right now to stop sitting on their butts and contesting Nancy Pelosi's choice. Hakeem Jeffries is only supported by a minority of the caucus. If there were somebody who's at the center of the caucus, like the names I just mentioned, running for leadership in competition with Hakeem Jeffries, that person would have a chance to win. It's time for the progressives to stand up on their hind legs and to fight for something instead of caving and caving and caving and caving. There's a cluster of new progressives coming into the Congress. They come in wanting to fight, not wanting to cave. The people who've been in before, including the squad, should join them. At some point, the squad has to create the fights they promised. At some point, the current progressives have to fight for the future. That's so important. That has to be done right now. We can't afford the leadership of Hakeem Jeffries. Our very survival is at stake. We cannot afford to elect to leadership of the Democratic Party and leadership that might be there a long time over the next 20 years. Somebody who's a corporate tool. Jeffries is a corporate tool. Pete Aguilar is a corporate tool. We can't allow this to happen. There has to be a fight. There has to be a big fight. And it has to be done right now. Okay, I see a few folks are here. There's D. says hello everyone on Facebook. Kay says hi Joe and D. And D says hi Kay. Kay says I like Whitmer. Kay, I like Whitmer too. But there's no indication that Whitmer is more than an establishment Democrat. There's no indication that she would fight hard for Medicare for all. There's no indication that she would fight for a Green New Deal. We need leaders who are going to do that. And by the way, we have to consider that Whitmer in 2024 would likely be a candidate for president if Biden were to say that he wants to hang it up. But Dingell is in a different sphere. She is a candidate for Speaker of the House, and that's where we really need her. We need her there for Speaker of the House. We don't need a female Joe Biden for the presidency. We need a female Bernie Sanders. Whitmer is not a female Bernie Sanders. Sandy Degg says, shared. Hello, Sandy. So glad you're here. And D says, hi, Sandy. K says, hi, Sandy. Sandy says, hi, Dolores, Kay, Joe, and Bonnie. Sandy, I think Bonnie is yet to arise. Okay, but I'm sure when I tell her that you greeted her this morning, that she will appreciate that. Okay, folks, I need to wind this up because I have another stream in just a few minutes. As I recall, it's at 11:15. That one's going to be on change also. Okay, I'm sure you'll enjoy that. So please return in a few minutes for that stream. Thank you for coming to this one. By the way, my Patreon account is patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And my Buy Me a Coffee account is buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. So I'd appreciate it very much if you visit them occasionally. Sandy says, that's okay, let her sleep. Actually, one of the things I have to do now is to get her up because we have to go somewhere this afternoon. Anyway, thanks, everybody. I'll see you soon again.